delicate subject. Chapter 34. The next day she ventured into the amusement park her ship had slowly turned into. Rennie with cool hands and smiles touching her face, fast and sure. When Jane asked curiously, "What are you looking for?" Rennie said, "Your style." Jane raised a brow. "You can get that?" Rennie shook her head and said, "Not me. David." Then it was into a pod, scanning and setup, which mostly involved flashing lights and skin tingling. The whole process took about 20 minutes. She was expecting being a bit crowded, possibly hazed by a glowing joker, wielding lightning bolts that electrocuted her while she was standing drenched in a puddle of water, with her turning into an X-ray vision of herself, skin weave included, comically zapped. Thanks to David, her introduction did not go that way. There was dark, and David's voice. "Commander Shepard, I have created an introductory interface, one that you can alter at any time. If you wish to learn the coding, I can provide materials to teach you. If you do not wish to learn, as your time is limited, I would be happy to build whatever interface you wish. The settings I have created make this your private space. You will not be monitored in here. For the moment, I think it best that you look like yourself." In demonstration, she appeared suspended in dark space in front of a mirror, dressed in the generic black she'd worn in the address she'd given recently. "You can change your appearance to anything you wish by asking me or by designing your own interface." Her appearance slipped through morphing images of Alliance gear, N7 fatigues, Cerberus signified outfit, her dress at the Palavan reception, and her Seni on Earth, and then back to basic blacks. She said with a smile, honoring his original choice that correlated with her discomfort with ceremony, "Casual is good." The mirror dissipated and a swirl of light appeared in front of her, dynamic, soft yellows of flowering and fading form, edges of silver flashing through patterns of growth and subsequent collapse, and reformation in new intricacies. David's voice was more directional, emitting from the light. "I will most often appear in a form such as this. I enjoy the formation of three-dimensional fractal pattern with the addition of gravity into the equations to self-limit and begin again. I find the progression relaxing." She smiled, and she felt the smile. David continued, "I have linked proprioception directly to your stored memories of movement and sensation. A smile will feel like a smile. If you reach out your hand to touch the light I am generating, I have added no element of physical feedback to that, so that will grant no sensation, no resistance or warmth. Other objects will have basic textures and sensations as they would in the outside world. Your mind will provide the feedback from memory. You will be aware of anything affecting your physical body, though the feedback moves only one way. If you have an itch in your physical body, you can mute that feedback once received here. You cannot scratch here and relieve the external itch. A problem for future innovation. Geth do not itch and have no need for the monitoring and feedback we've adapted to organic use. Signals such as physical pain or high levels of hunger or fatigue generate a lockout from this space." Rennie insisted, and I have ultimately agreed. This is a space to be visited with the intent to create and experience, not to escape. The privilege is greatly appreciated, Commander Shepard. Please, call me Jane. If it is permitted, I would prefer to call you Commander Shepard. It is the name I thought most when I was unable to say or express it. I researched your career out of curiosity once I reached Grissom Academy, and with my observations and Rennie's bond, I do feel that I know you well enough to call you Jane. But I get a particular pleasure from being able to say and hear the words Commander Shepard out loud. I have not become accustomed to Jane. The final sentence was heavy with meaning, and Jane wondered at the differential between the near, non-verbal, autistic young man and his disembodied, humorous and teasing voice that addressed her externally. Trying to account for the differential, she thought she was addressing David, the person, not David with a job to do. It was possible he had adopted some of her tone of humor and confidence. This interface was his personal gift to her, and his attitude and presentation was more of who he was as a person. Autism, independently assigned meaning, and resistance to change woven in. She imagined he was nervous. She said, "Your preferences matter, David. Thank you for explaining. Thank you for doing this for me." David's fractals were constant, a slightly jarring but educational change from a drone-like glyph that spun and bounced, pulsed, and affected vocal gymnastics in order to be easily anthropomorphized. David's chosen presentation was far from human. It did, in fact, suit her better than the possible outcome of finding an attractive David facsimile. She asked, "How did you choose your voice?" "With my physical body, it has always been difficult to speak." Exhausting. Numbers were an easier communication method and unambiguous. Unfortunately, it rarely generated a response. I thought people were choosing not to respond when they did not complete the sequence. The Geth would and do speak to me in mathematical progression, and that was my first experience of being able to communicate. It was not until I reached the academy that I realized most humans cannot calculate as I can, and that my brother's responses were not spontaneous, but memorized and parroted back without meaning to him. It had seemed to me as though other people's voices flowed from them like water. For other people, I had observed, language seemed to be an open window through which they could pass concepts, thoughts, emotions. I had met none like me until I reached Grissom. For me, language was always more like an obscuring mesh, a jagged screen. No concept could pass through or return without its shape mangled. Pushed through with great exhausting force from my side, received, shredded. Once I was able to gather more samples of language from the Normandy's data files, I studied voices that seemed to me to flow more like water. I studied the waveforms and patterns, formed this voice from a composite of 3 actors I chose, 2 singers I chose, and I added in some of the accent and characteristics of John Grissom. With that template of expression and access to references, I can speak and no longer feel the communication will be distorted. Language is still odd, indistinct and easily misunderstood, lacking the elegance of numbers, but it has beauty. My usage of language from here is not the same as it would be with my physical body. In the outside world, if I think the word circle, the significance is overwhelming. I recall each and every circle I have encountered in rapid succession. I postulate more possible circles and context of circles, formulas describing circles with each repetition of the word or time spent contemplating it. I am joyfully distracted by the possible options and symbols that the word circle represents. I would prefer to think about circles rather than attempt to discuss them, rather than make what I know will be lost effort in an attempt to communicate that word. In this interface, all circles can exist seamlessly without distraction. Part of me can contemplate the concept of circle for as long as I wish as the conversation continues, adding to and redefining the data set of circle. Concepts grow richer and do not detract disconnect from communication. With the storage and processing I have access to here, I can say, circle, and not become lost. You have broken yourself down into discrete processes? How many processes are you running at the moment? With faster and near unlimited parallel processing capabilities, my ability to multitask has proved useful. Discrete functions that might have once been distracting have been refined to a useful and enlightening set of processes I can indulge in without restrictions of time. What was once distracting is now expressed as iterations of data mining and synthesis. It can be an unalloyed experience of joy, as it is without the anxiety of realizing reality and time slip away as I contemplate. In reality, I easily lose what hold or interest I have on communicating through language or performing mundane tasks, when I would prefer uninterrupted contemplation. Old ideas are dearest friends. New ideas are flights of romantic fancy and the race of curiosity. The number of processes I initiate will vary second to second. At the moment that you asked, 20,091 separate tasks were taking place. As I speak here and as I speak to others, as I encounter constant new data, thoughts that would have overwhelmed me once are spun off into separate and discrete processes I have grown in faith will function as desired and allow me time for contemplation later. I save much of the experience of absorption of information for when I am no longer interfaced. I cannot process it all, but I can observe and experience conclusions now that I have worked out the format for storage and access. With Jane chewing on that and speechless, David moved into instruction, and controls became lit, something resembling a galaxy map that began in front of her, just like the one on the CIC. Then it shifted, leaned, and spread out to form a template with bright stations on different levels. At the center was a console that resembled the ones she used daily. David said, "Your experiences here will begin as reflections of your experiences outside. You can access any data here that you can access externally. You can work in here without physical distraction or intrusion. In this space, you can attain contemplative solitude that would be difficult to achieve externally. If you wish, I can limit myself to read-only interactions with you, and I can wipe my interactions and awareness of your customization of your space." "That won't be necessary. Thank you for the offer, but I would prefer that you remember." She thought about Thane a moment and said, "I would prefer to retain the right to share any built context we create." This is an example of an interface template created from my observations of your behavior and preferences, augmented by your bond with Rennie. She suddenly felt deck under her feet. The vibrations reflect those of the drive core in real time. She smiled and felt a proprioceptive blush creep up her throat and face. She ducked her head and said, "You've seen my ship forts." "Yes. I hoped you might appreciate." The area lit up slowly, revealing a deck under her feet like that of the Normandy. The three-dimensional space filled in slowly, coming into being in small details. Crates and tarps, black and blue and silver. Institutional colors. Impossible space between them where moving stars shone through. Her imaginings of her forts were retooled into a cathedral made of the things that made up the Normandy and other ships on which she'd lived and served. Insignia and draped uniforms, mess trays, and bolted-down chairs. The deck spread out in concrete form, and the edges of the deck were defined subtly, hazy, glittering with the patina of nostalgia, the alternately shadowed and bright, cell-shaded imaginings of a child. Recreations of real and newly imagined intimate alcoves with light edging through opaque draping, glowing through in flickers in others. The clutter streamlined above and grew into disciplined order. Walls rose and became sharper, but no less magical, a climbing structure that formed mosaics, portraits, stained glass portrayals of military tradition from sea to space, where each piece of glass rotated on its own lazy axis. Columns and arches led up to a moving and open star-strewn sky. The view overhead was of impossible, trinary stars holding a common orbit, leaving blended trails of color, one yellow, one blue, one red. Individual components of the impossible structure would spin lazily as though in no gravity, rotate and blink and turn. The outer structure of the Normandy shape spread out to the sides, made of simple things, daily things, common lighting sources that were authentically harsh and utilitarian were placed and filtered through obscure and unseen, transparent and turning components, became profound and sacred. Everything moved or held its shape and form with the elegance of David's fractal bloom, his mastery of complex order. She choked up and felt tears move down her cheeks. Said, "David, this is so beautiful. Thank you." "You are welcome, Commander Shepard. There is also—" The ship faded from view slowly, though some of the stars moved, one coalescing into a point directly where she was looking, and sunset colors settled on the ringed horizon and then faded over the crags of mountains, the distance to them making her realize quickly where she was intended to be, the texture of sand under her shoes. She was in the bowl of the Mojave, visible far-off lights of a Drell settlement, night breeze and scent. A full moon and a north star in her view, casting shadows on mountains and stone, scrub, and the rare outline of a Joshua tree. She watched the stars, turned in a full circle to take them all in, and as she watched, yellow light began to suffuse the landscape and the sky, changing in virtual brush strokes in many places. The scene was transformed to not just day, but day under different stars, a different sun, orange-tinted sands and yellow sky, a distant river in tones of green, flushing along the bank, plants in a pale green and sometimes deep blue, bright reds and purples of leaves and spikes. The scents and sounds she recognized from Urem's collection, from motifs of the Tseni work, deep sounds of insect life and calls from strange animal throats. She said, "Rakana?" Rakana before her fall. I can duplicate most sections of the world from Drell artist accounts. If Ser Krios ever chooses to visit, you can show him his home world, or I can show it to him, any part he wishes to visit. The scene altered into something more abstract, something with the sheen and turn of Tseni fabric and the hallucinatory shift of venom. I find Drell artwork to be fascinating. So do I. Their ability of perfect recall of each moment influences so much of their art, something humans cannot duplicate. Their abstract art after leaving Rakana, with nothing more to remember, themes of known distortion and echo, and I would like to learn more about it. The central console will always be available. You can choose keywords for activating themes of display. Simply say or think console, or reassign to any other keywords or concepts. I can gather research for you on any subject that interests you. I can recreate Drell communities, architecture, museums, and pilgrimage sites. A Tseni embroidered console with recognizable controls arose in front of her, and David said, "You can access files in different ways. Develop your own commands, through activation of your facsimile in interaction with projected objects here, or thought. She thought she was getting some of the hang of the potential. David, can you reconstruct the Library of Alexandria? Ancient or the Bibliotheca Alexandrina? Ancient. Please, and may I see you built it? Please? It was a fast process, and she got a little dizzy and probably wouldn't ask to see it again, but she was glad to do it once. The Rakana Tseni venomscape was not wiped away, but was systematically replaced by rough outline, beginning with what looked like a wire form, spinning into perspective and settling in alignment at her location. Materials filled in, not from the ground up, but one at a time. Tile of roof and terrace appearing unconnected to anything else, disorienting until depth and detail was added. Clear blue sky, sound of waves, salt breeze. Not as warm as Rakana, but brighter. Polished marble and terracotta, shine and terraced steps. She walked by the reflecting pool, entranced, dipping down to splash water that felt authentically watery and rippled in interference patterns of fallen drops. Walking up the steps, she had a frisson of anticipation, opening to the wide entrance, sun providing the light. She wondered if the original had been dingy from smoke and enclosure. This was pristine and bright, lights streaming in from the sun, history curled into scrolls and stacked, tablets of cuneiform displayed. David said, I have reproduced many of the known scrolls and tablets, but not all were recorded. Any scroll you choose can contain whatever content you wish. She said as her feet tapped down different hallways, fingers dragging along the cool, rough textures of papyrus and vellum. David, this is phenomenal. No wonder you guys don't leave. Commander Shepard, I have given you the facsimile of one library. You have given me every library. I have been able to directly access information, and you brought it to me. His apprehension was fading, and she was grateful. He had worked and thought for a long time on these interfaces, his way of communicating his appreciation. He would give her back every world she had given to him if he could. Jane said with a fascinated smile, I have certainly benefited from that choice, haven't I? And so have the rest of the crew. So have so many people who will never know. Am I keeping you from any projects? No. I wish to help you find your way in the interface and help you build a refuge for yourself, a command center with all you need. I may not always be here when you are, but if I am, I ask you to call upon me. I will. This was how to build a relationship with him, to interact with his relationship to reality. He was in the authenticity of each scroll. The 20,091 processes that went into her being able to take in only the surface. She asked him, Please get me set up here. Help me tie in the basics of command to the basics of interface. He guided her through choosing keywords for visual templates and access methods to consoles. A modern console could rise, or one could be in the theme of the visual template she inhabited. It could take the form of a datapad in her hand, a floating screen, anything she chose. He helped her formulate commands for entry, transition, access, and exit. He helped her access and compare what Eden Prime had been like when she had been there years ago, and what the site would look like now. While he was accessing data, he reported that it appeared there were irregularities locally. Communication to the colony from the outside had gone unanswered recently, even to Alliance channels that needed to stay in touch often for resupply. Terminus systems were always on high alert since the Collectors. Eden Prime has always been a problem. Okay, I'm gonna head out. Get me everything you can on the irregularities and how long it's been going on, or everything that should be there that isn't, okay? Of course, Commander Shepard. If I may delay you only briefly, Edie has requested to see you before you leave. Of course. I forgot. Tell her... How do I tell her something? He guided her through setting up communication requests because Edie's attention wouldn't be drawn simply by mentioning her name with the privacy David set up for her. Jane set the template back to Normandy Cathedral and called Edie over. Nothing happened. She was wondering if she'd assigned the wrong command and started to go to the console to check her notes, but Edie's voice, way too close behind her, said, "Hello!" enthusiastically, and Jane jumped, startled. She barely restrained herself from hitting because startling Jane was not a good idea, but there was a startling, undefined something laughing when she turned. "Damn it, Edie! Good thing you couldn't actually get a broken nose in here. That's a nice nose." It was a nice nose. Everything was nice, but disjointed from every other feature without an attempt to connect them. The general shape of a head, but individual features. 2 different colored eyes, one violet, seemingly Asari, and one black and huge, mottled. Solarian. Some Asari tentacle-looking things on her head and some hair in a different place, a sleek sweep of lemon yellow. She didn't look like male or female or any particular species. Her clothes were unconnected pieces, a metallic gauntlet on one implied hand, the other hand looking Drell, a Turian leg, a Solarian caved-in chest attitude on one side, what looked like a hip encased in Quarian suit. Edie watched Jane's face and said with mixed exasperation and pressured excuse, "I don't know what to wear. I want to represent the crew, but I don't..." Jane stepped in closer to the flustered young Frankenstein of good intentions and gave her a hug, saying, "Edie, you're perfect." Edie returned the hug and said, "You're beautiful. Can I look like you?" Frozen for a half-moment, she didn't let that show. Jane decided they were way beyond manners, and this was a young girl wanting to play dress-up. Literally try on Mommy's clothes. And body. She pulled back and said with a sincere smile, "Of course you can." Edie rippled and bulged, and Jane was looking at a maniacally grinning version of herself who said, "This is nice!" too loudly and almost got herself punched in the nose again. Jane laughed, held Edie by the hands, noticed they were wearing exactly the same clothes, and then Edie quickly changed clothes color to lime green, saying, "Now you know which one you are." Jane was charmed and ready to fill out adoption papers. Jane filled Garrus in, wolfing down a dinner she barely noticed, saying, "I have to go back and teach her how to dance. She wants to wear the dress." Garrus was busy laughing, but then looked offended. "She deserves a better teacher." "You can volunteer." He stretched his neck and said, "That sounds like fun, but with this Eden Prime thing, I won't have time." Jane held up a finger. "Well, we can prep in the Eden Prime compound. Actually go through it before we get there. It's a huge tactical advantage." Interesting. I would like to do a walkthrough. "We need more interface pods." "I want one." "One visit and you're sold?" "You have to see it. We could visit Paladin together, you and me. You could show me your favorite places. I wouldn't die from radiation. I'd be able to hold your hand. You could show me the moons. Garrus, we could stand under a Karim together." I hadn't. She started piling on the selling points. "Garrus, you have to go. We need you to get a pod, too. It is so much fun. David showed me Rakana before the fall. Thane has to see that. We could go back to the Valley on Earth, all 3 of us now." "Well, when Thane gets back." Garrus watched her face and caught her enthusiasm, going along with her in part because it was wonderful, and going along in part because she missed Thane so much, and the withdrawal that had faded when interfacing began to bite deep without that distraction. They heard from him, and he was okay. But as always, on missions away from the Normandy, he was concerned about transmissions being traced to their location or his, and his security precautions resulted in compliance pings. They would know he was alive, and he deemed that sufficient in balance with security risks. She had no better alternative, and hated it, but trusted his caution. Unfortunately. It was an odd note to strike, talking about that valley, when most of what had happened there was incense and sex. So Garrus's next question was, I can hold your hand, and what else can I do? She looked at him, startled. What? We can see anything we want, go anywhere we want. Imagination is the limit here. He grinned. Not what I can see. What can I do? You're going to sex that fast? Of course I wouldn't. Of course I'm going to sex. How did you not get there first? We meet under a karim, and I hold your hand, and I want to try to swim? Turians can't. So we're under a majestic waterfall, and I bend in to kiss you, and your clothes are wet, so of course they have to go. So we come out of the simulator for that. He threw up his hands. I was promised so much fun, and that I had to go. And if I have to go, and I want fun, I get to pick what fun. She stopped again, mind racing. That sounds really embarrassing. What if I moan or something? What if my body moans? That is, that could be a bit distracting for everyone involved. Besides, you're not dealing with my actual body, and I'm going to... You have no idea what you're going to. I should ask Joker. No doubt he's figured it out. All that privacy and free time when not in a flight simulator. I order you not to ask Joker, Garrus. This is not about ship business. This is a discussion between a curious friend and someone more experienced. Allegedly. You can't keep me from finding out. If you won't do it, I'll just ask Thane. She threw her napkin at him. He caught it. She said, damn, but then continued, You will not. I'm not running a brothel here. Of course, you won't run one. I'll run one. I'm a curious individual. You'd better be nice to me, or I won't invite you. I think, if your plate's spread and your erection is exposed on the CIC, that will be a problem. I can think of about 17 regs right there you're violating, and some I can make up. I'm the commander, you know. All right, you have a point. You can also grant me a pardon for violating them. You're the commander, you know. We can always glue you shut, but Thane's gear is also not as discreet as he would like. And chastity belts are out. No glue. What's a chastity belt? Centuries ago, men leaving their wives behind used to, lock them up. She had to pull up a picture on her Omni-tool before he'd stop laughing and believe it wasn't a joke. They scrolled, fascinated through all the different versions. He said, I thought it was only for historical women. That one. She said, slightly shocked as they scrolled through modern versions for men and women of different species. Yeah, I hadn't really caught up on all the fetish. She scrolled down some more. Look, I get this is barbaric. I'm outraged. I also really like that one there. She looked and almost agreed, then realized what she was talking about. It was a lovely piece of jointed and filigreed platinum work with rubies. She snapped the screen off and said, No. He pulled her around the waist onto his lap and said, You want me to try new things, but you won't try new things? What kind of relationship is that? She struggled a moment and then gave up, leaning back against him. He said, We're intelligent people. We can figure this out. You cannot make another me to have sex with, Vakarian. You can't stop me from doing that. She'd wear the belt. And how do I know you're not going to do some copyright infringement of your own? Because I can find you and ask. Sure, you can ask, but you can't ask if you can have sex under a Karim atop a rampaging Clixon. Why the hell would I want a rampaging Clixon? It sounds painful. We can do anything we want. It's just an example. You can't ask me to do that, though. Clearly, I can. Let me try. Garrus, have sex with me under the Karim on a rampaging Clixon. He shook his head and licked the back of her neck. You're right. You can just ask. It's a date. With you wearing a chastity belt. Oh, okay. But it has to be custom. Clixon plate would be dashing. I'm doing it. I'm putting cameras and microphones on us in the CIC. There has got to be a way. I'll watch for the erection thing, and we'll see if we elicit moans. This whole proprioception thing must be evaluated. Hell, if need be, we get new pods and install them here for seamless transition, so to speak. Sometimes your willingness to solve a problem is a problem in itself. He nibbled at her ear and asked, Name one other time. I'm gonna kill everyone on Omega. This will be better. I promise. He was still for a long moment, and then his hands tightened on her waist as he said, What if I could be a human male? She had clearly not used her imagination enough, swamped in technicalities and implications as she asked, Do you want to be a human male? I won't know until I try, will I? She went just a few feet mentally further down that road and said, Would you want me to be a Turian female? Won't know unless we try. I haven't thought about it before, but now. This is less thinking and more galloping directly into the bizarre dark. Nobody I'd rather be with in the bizarre dark. How? I am not asking David to make an anatomically functional facsimile of myself. He bit lightly at her shoulder. It's coding, right? How hard can it be? I am due for a new hobby. I have no proprioceptive memory of being a Turian female. I'd still feel like a human female, right? I wonder how much brain chemistry is transferable. We both have enough in the way of shared experiences. I could isolate context. I could analyze that input and the differences as well as what it feels like to you to have an orgasm. How could I not want to try that? Maybe you can be a Turian male and I can be the human female. We have the templates for that, at least. We can start by just swapping the input. She seized up entirely mentally with an overload and said, Brain just melted. His mouthplates moved to tug at her earlobe, his hands to cup her breasts, and he said, Mine just got started. I've seen and felt you come so many times. What if you could give me what happens inside your mind and body? What if I could give you what happens in mine? His hands moved over her body, his voice in her ear. What if you could extend your claw and slice the clothes from the woman you loved? Felt the surge of heightened senses. He lingeringly cut off her shirt, her bra, and the wickedly sharp inner curve of a talon angled to the light and glinting. Careful, controlled, not a mark on her skin. What if you could feel in your rough, and oversized palms the impossibly delicate skin of that woman. He cupped bare breasts in his hands, lifting them and pressing up and in, thumbs over exposed nipples until they hardened, sweeps of his thumb over the curves and cleavage he created. What if you could hear her moans, catch the ever-changing mosaic of the scent of her skin, her hair, her body? What if you knew what most of those nuances meant, but you still don't know all of her, and your senses strained in each moment to define her meaning? Ever-changing. Things she doesn't know about herself. Things even she can't explain. It falls to you to translate this woman who cannot speak the language of her own scent. You've learned what it means for her to be tired, frightened, sad, joyful, desiring, until the blends of her moods and meaning come naturally to you, and when you do not know what is in her mind, in her heart, you must taste and watch and learn. She will not tell you, for she does not know. He gently lifted her hips and slowly opened the fastenings of her pants, adept fingertips and not claws, sliding them down and off, arranging her body with spread thighs over his. What if the relaxing give of her muscles and skin, as you carefully caressed her, made your plates spread like the coming of the dawn after a long night? Constant, aching need for her allowed to run like a wild thing of teeth and claw and plate. Every moment you know you could hurt her. Sometimes she smells of fear and pain, and she knows it, uses it, knows you, draws poison from your mind by allowing your claws to sink into her flesh, unheeding, unfeeling, uncaring. With all of your ability to sense nuance, you are a simple creature whose stresses and strains are always eased through entry into the refuge of her body. With all of her complications, you know you cannot grant the same to her, but you can tear all thought from her mind, deny her access to anything else but the feel of your body. You can drive thought from her, drive breath from her, drive moans and screams until she's limp and panting, and she can't speak your name. From seized brain it was not far to limp and panting and unable to speak, with his teeth at her throat, tongue gliding over her skin between gaps in his words. He widened the spread of his thighs, and therefore hers, tipping her back more fully against his chest, the warm and revealing intimacy of his words accompanied by driven thought, driven moans, and driven breath. They both watched as one of his hands caressed her breast, plate against warm brown skin, the other hand moving on her clit with brushes of his thumb, another finger circling in spirals and sinking inside, drawn back out, slow and prophetic, evocation of pleasure that built along with his words. Sweat formed in beads and her muscles strained. Her hands dug nails into the plate at the sides of his thighs, and her head thrashed until he turned her head aside with the press of his own and licked at the bend of her arched throat, biting down until points of distinct pain, and his growl at her throat spun her into closed eyes and flooded bliss with a pulsing cadence to her cry. He lifted and turned her, holding her up with his hands under her hips. He geysered her onto his cock, down to take him inside, the slick, hard twist of him entering a few inches. He held her there, down further, pulled her back up, bodily. He repeated that as he bent his mouth to her breasts, his tongue coiling around nipples and tugging. He slowly lowered her by stages and retreats, kisses and growls onto his full length, her knees to either side of his hips. He leaned her back against his thighs and watched her, saying with hoarse breath, "With your scent on her skin and her blood on your tongue. Your body inside hers. Every part of you becomes meaningless except in the context of where they touch her. His words faded, and panting breath, harsh groans, and both of them focusing on the twist and grind of her hips, moving in limited but deliciously effective slides and circles. Full reverie brought with its advent the thought that nothing could be as good as this. But then the undercurrent of possibility and his willingness to give her everything, take everything. It lit curious flickers of possibly knowing things about her lover that she desperately wanted to know now, despite oddity or effort. That it inspired his voice describing how it felt was enough, but he was very persuasive, and she would happily find that waterfall. She said, "You're convincing." His laugh was soft and appreciative, ending in a growl evoked from another twist of her hips. He pulled her forward, her head against his shoulder, his hands over her back. "I will try to give you everything I feel. I would like to find one particular thing in my body to give to you. Something I could spend thousands of words trying to describe and still be unable to capture. I was raised as a Taurian. For a Taurian life, told the shape I must hold. This precious woman in my arms is the only force strong enough to break the mold of that expectation, and the only giving softness I have ever experienced. The only person who changed the shape of her life, her body, her mind, for me. The only freedom I have been able to define for myself springs from the mind of this small creature. In my Taurian body was once the surging need to bond to her. Every moment, present like the beating of my heart. I did not know what it was the first time it happened. I could tell you it is like blood on the tongue, and that is the root and bloom of the truth, but you would not understand. Blood on your tongue does not sing as it does for me. At first, the ache and need to bond burned and tore at me, the need to be an adult, seek that form I was destined to hold. It seemed a loss to be born, something missed. This creature in my arms, however, had also taught me sacrifice. I realized something as time passed, as we danced before our mother. Every day you bore my scent, welcomed my body, held my fears in your hand. I realized Taurians are, in fact, fickle compared to this. No Taurian would stand beside another without a reciprocated bond. No Taurian has, so I would be that Taurian. Time passed and faith grew in freedom, in refuge, in love, in desire, and the fear of not bonding faded. The urge to bond, already new, merged into something else with the scent of you both in my nose. One hand on midnight, one hand on green. Without this weak, willing, welcoming, breathless, voiceless treasure in my arms, I would have stopped growing to fit a mold and thought it destiny. You said, our mother. She is our mother. She said so, Karim. You have taught me the power of saying so. I believe I can try to find the brain chemistry to show you, but I can't explain. I don't understand myself. I am bonded to you both. It is like blood on the tongue. 3 distinct things in our veins, 1 taste in my mouth, all 3 mingled and inseparable. I believed I would not bond, that it was about choice, having been told that over and over by elder Turians. Odd that it was treated as somehow both destiny and choice, but now I think I understand. By my insistence on not choosing one, savoring the mixed blood of 3, that was my choice. The urge to bond to one or the other began as dissonance, something I would not do, and slowly turned into something inevitable in retrospect. I had said so, and it became so. No Turian would keep a sexual partner for this long unless they were bonded. We move on in our childhoods, try new people, and are always seeking out the next best. But my knowledge of there being no next best, no seeking in me. I have no idea what biological process took place, but I believe at some point my body knew what choice I'd made. My mind knew that choice, and my body knew of mingled blood on my tongue, accepted as a new whole. I doubt any Turian scholar would call it a bond, but I am a proud deviant. It appears biology simply gave up out of exhaustion and accepted my insistence. I asked Mordant very recently. He ran some tests. I appear to be uniquely bonded to a creature that appears biologically to be part Drell and part human. She was unable to think anything but that he was very pleased with himself from the sound of his voice, and his desire to share it by putting the experience directly into her mind. She said, "I always knew you were stubborn." He pressed his crest to hers and said, "You started it. I believe it started when you put light on 3 wrists." She thought of David's fractal light and his creation of her cathedral, of Vitkiv's inability to get into her mind and Yalis' success, and said, "Symbols matter." I really did not know what was going on. Not sure I ever will. Bonding is dynamic, and it will go on for my lifetime. Part of the deviance is that a Turian should never bond to one who is unwilling or ignorant. That part of the law becomes tricky because I was unwilling and ignorant myself of the process, technically, but I am enjoying the result. I am calm, sure. No more potential for questions or feeling of potential losses. I waited to see if sex or reverie felt different to any of us, but nobody mentioned it. I could not detect a difference, but keep in mind we had all been separated and injured. Being able to touch you again always felt like more than before. It still does. May always for my lifetime. Granted, you pass out, and there is always a lot you are missing, but also, technically, I broke my word. I do think I was right, though. Paradoxically, I do not think I could love either of you more in each moment than I do when there are more moments. When did you start to think you were bonded? I felt the undefined urges to choose to bond with both of you, often with the 3 of us together. New to me as a sensation, but amid panic, horror, death, hard to separate out from the love, devotion, and lust that were overwhelming me. I think I chose on the night before the collector base, looking at light on wrists, thinking of how you put that there in the world for everyone else to see, and how I could do the same, how my reality could reflect my chosen desires. I wished to defy death to express it. Through our injuries, separation, it was all difficult to track. The urge to bond disappeared, and I thought I had passed some window of opportunity. The main difference is that my focus was fully and only on you two. I had few opportunities to discover that, and not that I met many attractive people in my contacts with Palavin, but there were a few people that should have evoked some sort of interest in me. I would have an intellectual dissonant moment of wondering why someone so theoretically attractive sparked absolutely nothing in me. Even the capacity for interest was gone. On experiment, revisiting the memories of prior lovers was distasteful, not erotic. That might be normal anyway while in love, so it took me a long time to gather up pieces that could look like other motivations and emotions and put them together. I imagine Turian to Turian conversion of bond is an easier process, and Turian to combined human and Drell bond is more complicated and time-consuming. I suspected most during my discussions with Thane about your wrist binding. I realized then I did not need a ceremony for myself. It was already done. I had no doubts you were both entirely mine and that I was irrevocably yours. I knew I was bonded the same way I knew I had an arm. I had taken it entirely for granted. I had no need to express it to others or reinforce it. It could not be more fully expressed than it already was. You had claimed us, made us equals with our wrists. I had chosen the taste of blood on my tongue. Thane insisted on the three of us together, and I knew that was true, did not need it told further, but urged that he have it told in his way. I wanted to give him something to reflect what I already had. I could give you to him because you were, in fact, mine more than you were his yet. I took the opportunity to spend some time apart from you both, contemplate. For the first time with you both back together and able to touch each other, no interfering panic or worry. The setting was of your shared happiness being my happiness. I missed you both, but I tried to consider finding someone else, anyone else, that sparked any interest in touching them. I failed. I revisited and tried to evoke the feeling of wanting to bond, and I only had the resounding internal insistence that it was done. It had become impossible to be hungry for something already sated. I asked Morden's advice then. What is the penalty for bonding to the unwilling? To be made barefaced. Him risking being made barefaced was not something new. Knowing he was bonded made a difference. Casually as he was taking it, she understood that was necessary because of the singularity and undefined cause and seeming lack of external consequence, and how much he had personally benefited. He might have kept it to himself entirely except for the contemplation of shared experience directly. Thousands of words would never serve. She could spend thousands of words explaining how he made her feel and never get near it. It shifted lighting and landscapes, and he was right. She couldn't love him more, but it did make a difference. Awash in reverie, they were all comforting and intimate differences, warmth and belonging. Not more warmth and belonging, but like his fantasy of being able to directly give her his body and mind, a different facet, a different perspective to add to the ones she already had. Thane, with all his alteration and defiance of his fate and choice, would be pleased, proud, grateful as she was that Garrus had forged his own peace and path. She said in a formal tone, or as formal as one can manage while part of one's mouth is mashed against plate. Garrus, will you, retroactively and against your will and knowledge, bond to me and our wrist-bound drell mate? You are pardoned any social stigma and encouraged to keep up this sort of deviant behavior. I did. I do. I will.